Chapter 18. Wilks pushed the grey bar up with a grunt and slowly lowered it to his chest. He exhaled, raised it again. He was alone in the Kurtz's small gym. Falk had been there when he had walked in. The big man had nodded at him once, acknowledged his presence without a word, and left for the showers. Wilks understood. Their success with the capture was overshadowed by the deaths of 3 good people. No one wanted to talk about it. The decision to put off deep sleep for a few days hadn't needed discussion. They were only 1 day from the mother's planet, and the crew needed time to digest what had happened. Time didn't move in sleep after all. Wilks set the bar back on the lock and stood, reached for the smaller hand weights to work his pecs. He was already on his 2nd set. His muscles trembled slightly as he extended his arms and brought them in. But the body fatigue could be ignored. Concentrating on workouts helped, a little. The sweat that dripped from his skin washed away some of the feelings. Anger, sorrow, the guilt that had chased him for so long that he was still alive, for what it was worth. A career Marine who would never make it past Sergeant, who couldn't save the people who looked to him. Billie had holed up in her quarters alone. Wilks had gone to see her the night before, and again this morning, and had brought her something to eat. She had been listless, unresponsive. Her initial outburst of tears in the APC dock hadn't been repeated. He had searched for something to say to drive that haunted look from her eyes, but what? He could almost see her replay the death of the lieutenant over and over as she stared at the wall. Her friend, who she undoubtedly had felt responsible for. Wilks had saved Billie's life more than once, and she his. But to save her from guilt, that was more than he could do for himself. So he sat and watched her until the frustration had been so great that he had excused himself. Come here. Coward. His mind whispered, fucking coward. Another part of him spoke up. Hey, I'm not a shrink, I'm just a Marine. Yeah, right. He sighed heavily and moved back to the leg machine. Maybe a 3rd set would pound his brain into submission. Billie sat on her bed and tried not to think. They were in space. The mother alien was quiet in the hold. They were on their way to kill the brood on Earth and save Amy, who is probably dead, like Char, like Carvey and Dunstan, killed, murdered, dead. She pressed her hands to her forehead and waited for tears to come. No chance. She didn't deserve the release, and the sadness was too big. That they had been so close to the Kurtz, inches from safety. Carvey and Dunstan too. Brewster's best friend and the man who had been a teacher, who had convinced her that he had made a choice. To die. She hadn't known either of them as well as she had Char. Charlene. Billie had asked her on the trip that had cost her her life. Wilks had been to see her twice. She had tried to eat after he had gone, but the food stuck in her throat. Wilks's usually unreadable face had spoken plenty. She knew that he wanted to help, to make it better for her. But of course there was nothing to be said. They all had their own guilt. Dylan Brewster had come last night after Wilks had gone, to explain that it should have been him, not Carvey. That Carvey had never been a real Marine. His friend had been a kid at heart, eager to please. Hell, Carvey had only come on this trip because of Brewster. Billie understood his pain, but was alone in her own. She had not asked him to stay. She tried to be objective, to tell herself that Char had made her own decision. That was true, and it didn't matter, because she was gone. She'd thought she had come for Amy, but it was really about saving herself. Char Adcox had come to deal with her own loss, and Billy's reasons seemed selfish in comparison. Would the end justify the means? How could she know? Maybe the aliens were meant to have Earth. Who was she to fuck with fate? Billy lay down and pulled the coverlet up to her chin. Maybe later she would go and talk to Ripley. But not now. Ripley sat leaning against the dock wall next to the containment chamber and listened. Every now and then the Queen rustled, a sliding, clicking noise as she moved her sharp body against the smooth, alloyed interior of her prison. Ripley had spent most of the night here. The Queen had eventually tired of pounding and screaming in the early hours of the morning. Ripley checked the navigational comp and set McQuaid to work on repairs. The damage to the Kurtz had been minimal. Jones tried to get her to MedLab, but she was fine, and she had wanted to listen to the Queen beat uselessly against the walls for a while. Ripley was sorry about the deaths of Dunstan and Carvey and Adcox. They had all died to get the Queen to the Kurtz, and she knew that a large part of the responsibility was on her shoulders. But she would have died too, had it been called for. To wipe out the murderous breed, the bitch Queen who had caused the deaths of so many. The fleeting desire she'd had to blow the Queen into a million pieces when she could have was nothing compared to her hatred. The rage was hot and temporary. Her hatred was cold and hard and forever. The bastard's extermination would vindicate all she had become. She knew that living a life for revenge was not a healthy way to exist. She didn't care. This was right. She felt it stronger with every passing moment. Each hour was a step closer to fulfillment. The empty bay in front of her suddenly doubled. Ripley blinked several times. The double vision cleared. Her head still ached where the bitch's tail had slapped her, but it was minor. The huge bruise on her leg already seemed to be fading. She was just tired. She hadn't eaten lately. The thought of food and sleep was appealing. She stood and walked away from the door to the chamber. "Later, you shit," she called out over her shoulder. As she started towards the stairs, she noticed that the ship seemed to tilt slightly to the right. She frowned and paused, reached one hand out to touch the wall. The gravity wasn't supposed to flicker like that, she thought, taking another step towards the ladder. Suddenly, she felt like she was standing on the wall. She leaned into it, tried to right the effect. "Tully!" she shouted. No response. Something was horribly wrong. She saw the alarm button on the wall and reached for it. Why hasn't it gone off already? It was her last thought as she hit the button, and the lights went out.